know on behalf of the government that there was no intentions of having any discussions regarding any means of being able to put additional monies into that pension fund, regardless of whether it came from the company or it came from any sources. The government was not prepared to be a partner in finding that solution. So I will point out that the bill does allow for an external party to put more money into the pension plan, but we're not quite sure who that external party could be now that the amendment I've proposed doesn't appear to be getting any government support, and as I mentioned before, there doesn't seem to be a desire to even undertake any discussions on the specific matter. So, Madam Chair, as I said, this was discussed with the Premier's office. I did bring it to the Law Amendments Committee stage, where unfortunately did not receive the support of the government members. I will take the opportunity to thank my colleagues in the Progressive Conservative Caucus who did indicate their support and I believe interest in trying to have further discussions on this matter. So, Madam Chair, with that, allow me to read the resolution, which states as follows. On page 2, it would add after clause 3 the following, which would be a new clause 4, subsection 1, in this section, crown and stumpage have the same meanings as in the Crown Lands Act. Subsection 2, subject to subsection 4, the minister shall, as soon as is practical, enter into an agreement with the administrator to enable a portion of any stumpage or other charges paid to the Crown pursuant to subsection 35, subsection 1 of the Crown Lands Act to be directed to the pension plans. Subsection 3, the agreement entered into pursuant to subsection 2 must provide that the payment of a portion of any stumpage or other charges paid to the Crown pursuant to subsection 35(1) of the Crown's Land Act continue until the wind-up date. In subsection 4, the monies required for the purpose of this section must be paid out of monies appropriated for that purpose by the legislature. Then it would have pages 2 to 8, clauses 4 to 14, renumber as 5 to 15, and change cross-references accordingly. So, Madam Chair, I believe that explains what the amendment is, and I'm hoping with the time that has passed since we met at Law Amendments that the government may have had the opportunity to reconsider its position to oppose this amendment, and I'm hoping that if they are not in favor of this amendment, then they will at least indicate a desire to have some discussions on behalf of the retirees and the workers of the former New Page facility. And with that, Madam Chair, I would so move the amendment.
Thank you. I recognize the honourable member for Inverness.
Thank you, Madam Speaker, and I would just like to say that we would be supportive of the amendment because of the material benefit for the pensioners, New Page, and I think I'll keep it short today and leave it at that. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. The motion is that clause number 4, I guess, be added, be amended as presented in change sheet CWHB LIB-1. All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. The motion is defeated. Shall the remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? Carried. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, or Madam Chair, excuse me. Could you please call Bill 87, Good Forestry Management on Crown Land Act?
Call Bill number 87, Good Forestry Management on Crown Land Act. Recognize Clerk.
Madam Chair, the bill was referred back from the Law Amendments Committee without any amendments and contains 5 clauses.
Shall clause 1 carry? Shall the remaining clauses carry? Shall the title carry? Shall the bill carry? Carried. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, could you please call Bill 88, the Maritime Link Act?
Call Bill number 88, the Maritime Link Act.
Madam Chair, Bill number 88 was referred back from the Law Amendments Committee without any amendments and contains 7 clauses.
Shall clause 1 carry? I recognize the Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I wish to introduce several amendments to Bill number 88, the Maritime Link Act. I have them here, and there are copies for all members present. The intent of the amendments is to ensure that a review of the maritime link is done independently, including the setting of the scope in terms of reference of the review, and secondly, that the scope of the review be expanded to include the entire Muskrat Falls project, and thirdly, to ensure that the review includes an analysis of all available options to make sure that Nova Scotians get the lowest green option available.
We'll just give a few moments for people to have a look at the amendments as they're being passed out now. Order, please. For the benefit of the committee and the record, I'd ask that the mover actually go on record as, with a motion.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I move the amendments to Bill 88, which are being circulated and entitled Committee of the Whole House on Bills PC1.
Thank you. The motion is that the bill number 88 be amended as presented in change sheet CWHB PC-1. Is the House ready for the question? All in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, nay. Nay. The motion is defeated. Shall the remaining clauses carry? Carried. Shall the title carry? Carried. Shall the bill carry? Carried. Recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, could you please call Bill number 90, Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act?
Call Bill number 90, the Nova Scotia Provincial Exhibition Commission Act.
Madam Chair, Bill number 90 was referred back from the Private and Local Bills Committee, and it was referred back without any amendments and contains 2 clauses.
Shall Clause 1 carry? Carried. Shall the remaining clause carry? Carried. Shall the title carry? Carried. Shall the bill carry? Carried. I recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I wish the committee now rise and report progress.
Motion is carried. We will now rise and report business to the House. Order, please. The Chair of the Committee of the Whole House on Bill reports
that the Committee of the Whole has met and considered the following bills: Bills 81, 82, 84, 87, 88, and 90 without amendments, and Bill 86, which was reported with certain amendments by the Committee on Law Amendments to the Committee of the Whole without further amendments, and the Chairman has been instructed to recommend these bills to the favourable consideration of the House.
Ordered that these bills be read for a third time on a future day. I now recognize the Honourable Government House Leader.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Speaker, that concludes the government's business for today, unless we want to do third reading, and I don't feel there's consent to the House there. So, Madam Speaker, that concludes our business. We will rise now to meet from the hours of 2 to 6 p.m. tomorrow, and before that, I'd ask the House Leader of the official opposition to give business.
Now recognize the House Leader for the official opposition.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Tomorrow, following question period, the official opposition business will be Resolution 997, Premier Nova Scotia Power rate increase oppose, and Resolution 1093, Premier NDP government rate hearings attendance online petition support.
The motion is that we now rise to meet again tomorrow, Wednesday the 16th, between the hours of 2 and 6 p.m. All in favour say aye. Those opposed, nay. The motion is carried. We'll now move to late debate. Under motion under Rule 5.5, the late debate topic reads, therefore, be it resolved that all members of this House of Assembly urge the NTP government to take concrete actions to prevent cancelled surgeries, tests and procedures caused by strike or the threat of labour disruption in the healthcare field, as presented by the Honourable Member for Inverness. I now recognize the Honourable Leader of the Progressive Conservative Party.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. I am very pleased to rise and speak on the motion tonight because the motion is one that is designed to ensure that before this House rises that there is a plan in place to prevent disruptions in the continuous level of health care in our hospitals and other long-term care facilities that Nova Scotians rely on and deserve to know will be there for them whether the House is in session or not, regardless of what the state of a collective negotiation is or not, that there are ways of accomplishing those objectives, Madam Speaker, that it would be inappropriate for the House to rise and not deal with, as there are a high number of agreements coming up for negotiation. But, Madam Speaker, it was only last month that Nova Scotians saw what can happen with even the threat of a work stoppage. And I might add that that work stoppage could either be a strike or a lockout, that we need a solution that is fair to both the unions involved and also fair to the managers of our healthcare system, because both sides could initiate an interruption in healthcare services. We saw what can happen in the run-up to a potential work stoppage, Madam Speaker, just last month when negotiations between Local 42 at Capital Health and Capital Health reached an impasse, or were apparently headed for an impasse, and just because that impasse became a real possibility, the managers of Capital Health had to scale back their services to roughly 1/4 of normal levels. We all know how tightly the healthcare system runs now. There is no slack. There are wait lists already for important procedures. There are people who wait a long time for their surgeries. To scale back the Capital Health District by that magnitude resulted in the outright cancellation of over 500 surgeries and the postponement of 2,000 important medical procedures. Madam Speaker, that is a direct impact for 500 Nova Scotia families plus 2,000 Nova Scotia families. They were the ones who were locked out when negotiations appeared to be headed for an impasse. It is with them in mind that the resolution that is before us has been brought by the Progressive Conservative Caucus, because there has got to be a better way to respect collective bargaining rights, to protect taxpayers, and ensure an uninterrupted level of health care services delivered in our hospitals. In fact, Madam Speaker, there is a better way. 9 provinces out of 10, Nova Scotia being the only exception, have some form of legislation in place to keep the hospitals open, to keep surgeries running when there is a labour dispute. And only in Nova Scotia is there no form now, and the time has long come. We had examples in living colour just last month that make the urgent necessity of this resolution apparent. In fact, Madam Speaker, over the next year, there are 50 more health-related collective agreements up for negotiation, and there is one big one that starts later this month, which is with the over 6,000 nurses in our healthcare system who have their contract coming to negotiation. And, Madam Speaker, by all intents, looking at all sides, that is one that appears likely to be a very difficult negotiation, may well end up at an impasse, may well end up at the point where the threat of work stoppage is there again in our health system. In this case, the most looming one, but 50 more times over the next year. Madam Speaker, let me just say how important and vital nurses are to the delivery of healthcare services. I've heard other members mention that. I know we all agree on the importance of nurses to our system. We all recognize that nurses are people who chose to go into healthcare because they want to deliver a continuous stream of services to Nova Scotians that need it. It is exactly because nurses deliver such an important and vital service, as do other healthcare professionals, that we need a solution that keeps that flow of services going when negotiations reach an impasse. Madam Speaker, in other provinces, resolutions have been found that are fair, and I might also add they have found to be constitutional. This is not essential services legislation because, in fact, at Capital Health and other places, there are essential services plans in place. The problem is that the scaling back of our healthcare system to a quarter of its capacity under the essential services plans that have been negotiated now creates still too much hardship for too many people. The fact of the matter is that Nova Scotians need to know that the healthcare system, as tight as it is now, as overloaded as it is now, as stressed as it is now, will not be scaled back by even the threat of a work stoppage. This is true in other provinces. It's important, therefore, that in addition to the essential services plans that are in place, that there be an alternative dispute resolution plan that both parties to a negotiation can rely on and know that the outcome of collective bargaining is not going to be a lockout or a strike that is too much of a hardship on Nova Scotia patients, but rather there's some alternative dispute resolution that is fair to all sides, that is in place, so never again do we have a situation where a hospital or a health authority like Capital Health has to scale back on services and cancel surgeries. I will point out that there is exactly such a bill before the House now. I won't debate the bill in the course of debating this resolution, but I will point out that it is the product of a lot of research looking at other jurisdictions and how they have been constitutionally tested. So my point today is that there are solutions out there that have survived constitutional challenges, that have been found constitutional by the Supreme Court of Canada, that recognize the freedom of association that all Canadians enjoy, that all unions rely on, that no one disputes is a fundamental freedom of all Canadians, that includes the ability to collectively bargain, that includes the ability to meet with an employer and work out a contract that is fair to both sides through the bargaining process. That includes all of the normal steps in collective bargaining, including conciliation and mediation and binding mediation and arbitration when a negotiation has to go to all of those steps, all within the great protection of freedoms provided by the Canadian Charter of Human Rights and Freedoms. But, Madam Speaker, there are other Canadians, there are other Nova Scotians who may not be a direct party to a negotiation between a hospital or a health authority and a healthcare union. They are the taxpayers who ultimately pay the bills for the settlements. They are the patients who ultimately have their right to unfettered access to our public healthcare system set aside when negotiations reach an impasse. I say that because they deserve to know that there is a system in place that it respects the Canadian Charter of Rights and Freedoms, including freedom of association, freedom of unionization, respect for collective bargaining, and also respects the rights of all Canadians and all Nova Scotians to know their hospital, their doctor, their nurse, their paramedic, and so on will be there when they need them at all times, and respects the taxpayers' ability to fund agreements when they come. Because at the end of the day, when collective agreement negotiations reach an impasse, when conciliation hasn't worked, when mediation hasn't worked, the alternative is arbitration. But in this province and others, experience has been, and even members of the government side have pointed out, that the experience has been that arbitrated settlements up until now have not directed an arbitrator to take into account the state of our economy or the ability of Nova Scotia taxpayers to pay ever higher bills. And so there are solutions to even that problem, Madam Speaker. In other provinces, even the most wealthy provinces in Canada like Alberta and Ontario, have in place taxpayer protections that direct that an arbitrator must take into account the state of the economy of the province and the state of the level of taxation, the ability of the taxpayer to bear more. If it's important to Alberta to have that kind of protection in place, if it's important to Ontario to have that kind of protection in place, then clearly it's very important to Nova Scotia to have that same protection in place alongside of a fairly arbitrated settlement that takes into account the wages and benefits of similar workers, both union and non-unionized in other jurisdictions. And that's why I say, Madam Speaker, as I conclude my remarks, that it is imperative, given the pending risks to our healthcare system that are known today, that before this House rises, that the government bring forward a plan to show patients that the healthcare system will not be interrupted, will be there for them. Either a government plan, as it is their duty to do, or call the PC plan, which accomplishes the same objective. Thank you very much.
Recognize the honourable member for Halifax, Citadel Sable Island.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, it's a pleasure to be able to rise here and to say a few words in response to this resolution from the member for Inverness, and in response to the remarks from the leader of the third party. Madam Speaker, there's nothing more important in my constituency. There's no service more important in my constituency than the provision of health care. The Capital District Health Authority, the IWK, and the numerous agencies and service groups that have developed around the health services form a vital part of my constituency and the services that are provided not just to Nova Scotians, Madam Speaker, but right across the Atlantic region. And I'm very proud of the doctors, the nurses, the paramedics, the healthcare professions, the social workers, and all of those agencies who provide such great service and on whose services we so vitally depend. And Madam Speaker, I'm proud to say that people who come to use these services, who desperately need these services, almost invariably come away praising the healthcare professionals who serve them. The nurses, the doctors are first class, and you know, we talk here as if essentially this is about collective bargaining. For many of our healthcare professionals, for most of our healthcare professionals, the service in the healthcare profession is a calling. It's something they do not for the money, because they want to serve and they know that they provide a vitally important service. And I'm delighted, Madam Speaker, to include so many of them as my constituents, and that the service they provide is located so critically in my constituency. And I'm delighted, Madam Speaker, that the collective bargaining, the round of collective bargaining that recently concluded without a strike was in fact concluded without a strike. I know that the members opposite don't like the threat of a strike. Nobody likes an argument. Nobody likes the threat of disruption, particularly when it comes to health care. But, Madam Speaker, we really haven't come up with a better system. And if they had a better system, we would be happy to introduce it. But the system that the honourable members from the third party have proposed in the past have all failed, Madam Speaker. And it's almost as if they're going to wave a magic wand and say, poof, you know, this issue has been dealt with. This strike has been dealt with. This service is now provided. Well, we can't really wave magic wands. And here they want to wave the magic wand of banning a strike. In 2001, Madam Speaker, the Conservatives, they took away the right to strike and legislated a collective agreement, and it led to mass resignations in healthcare workers who threatened to leave the province, and they did. And that led to a nursing shortage and a shortage of healthcare professionals. And the answer always seems to be, Madam Speaker, that we're going to take away the right to strike. We're going to take away rights. It's fascinating, Madam Speaker, that the third party is so committed to the market, it's so committed to deregulation, it's so committed to free and fair association, but when it comes to the actual exercise of those rights, decides you can't have them. So in effect, they, at the rhetorical level, they care, but really at a practical level, they don't believe in collective bargaining, they don't believe in freedom of association, they don't believe in those fundamental rights. And this bill, Madam Speaker, it goes further. When I first saw this bill that the honourable member is proposing we adopt and discuss in this sitting, I thought they were talking about essential services. I thought they were saying that, you know, police officers, firefighters, corrections officers, whose services really are critical, that healthcare workers are an essential service, and many of them do provide a vitally essential service. And in the collective agreements, they do have procedures for defining essential services. And I thought the member of the third party was arguing that that we should define essential services a little better, and maybe that's something worth considering. But what this bill proposes to do, Madam Speaker, is go far beyond that. And what this resolution proposes to do goes far beyond that. And I know I don't have a lot of time, but I do want to note that in this bill that is being proposed, just about everyone who remotely provides a healthcare service, any unit of a hospital, any nursing home, any service that relies on health care professionals, including home care, home support, long-term care, any service that's provided to people who provide the home care service, all of those are going to be banned from striking, and we're going to send that to arbitration. It's really an extraordinary broad definition of what I initially thought would be an essential service, and it takes away that right. And Madam Speaker, however desirable it may be to take away those rights, or however desirable the third party may feel, it really just doesn't work. Taking away the right to strike from a vast majority of the healthcare professionals, almost all of them, if I read that definition of the bill, just does not work. And I know that the honourable members have been citing media reports on that, but I want to cite an editorial in the Chronicle Herald, Madam Speaker, on September 14th. Where the paramedics were going on strike. And this is what the editorial says, that it's a fight that the Conservative government lost. It says, the Macdonald government didn't lose the fight just because it got out-hustled. Ultimately, it failed to make a compelling case that the alternatives to collective bargaining are in fact superior. And this is what the editorial said. The evidence shows that in jurisdictions where binding arbitration is mandatory, or where healthcare workers are subject to essential services legislation, frustrations eventually mount and illegal strikes become more frequent and nasty. Patient safety is in far greater jeopardy then. If this bill is about protecting patient safety, it just does not do that. Quite the contrary, Madam Speaker. It says, is the status quo perfect? Hardly. Is there a better way? Probably not. Winston Churchill's famous paradox about democracy could just as well apply to collective bargaining in the health sector. Indeed, this is the worst system except for all the others. And I'll table that, Madam Speaker. So, Madam Speaker, it really is just a question of whether or not we can accomplish what the honourable members are suggesting through this arbitrariness of binding arbitration. And in the end, we just don't get what they propose. And I'll table another article. This is from the Herald on May 16, 2007, talking about the paramedic strike. Legal or illegal, paramedics in Nova Scotia will strike next spring, regardless of the legislation. And this is what they said. At the end of the day, if we're not getting a fair shake at the table, we'll be walking away anyway, no matter what legislation is put in place. And this is what the union said at the time. It says, it's sad that we've come to a point where lawyers are going to make decisions on behalf of our healthcare workers. And the strikes in Quebec and Alberta in particular, Madam Speaker, are the longest. And those jurisdictions have precisely what the honourable members want to introduce here. And we say no thank you to that. Really, If the honourable members are really concerned about healthcare and wait times and surgery, they would support the initiatives that have come forward from the government in the last 2-3 years, Madam Speaker. The Better Care Sooner plan focuses on prevention. And along those lines, we've introduced legislation on tobacco control and alcohol control, reducing the risk of head injuries, tanning beds, early detection of various types of infections and diseases, health promotion initiatives to promote healthy children, a mental health strategy, fair drug prices, caregiver benefits, emergency room supports, collaborative emergency centers, 4 of them, nursing home beds, physician resources. That's what real change is about, Madam Speaker. It's about introducing real programs and real benefits and real incentives that will create better care sooner, that will make reduce wait times for Nova Scotians, that would make us healthier and safer. But banning strikes, forcing agreements on people, they do not deal with the underlying problems in the healthcare system as much as we would like to. And this plan, Our Better Care Sooner, does it far better than any legislation that we've seen from the opposition today. Thank you, Madam Speaker.
Thank you. Now recognize the honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, and I will be sharing my time, the 10 minutes, with my colleague from Kings West.
I'm sorry.
At the end.
At the end. May I do that?
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask the clerk a calling on that. I'm not familiar.
If not, I'm going to speak.
Just to be clear, in debate, if you sit down during your time, the next rotation would go to the other parties. So if that's your choice, so be it. But I now recognize the honourable member for Halifax, Clayton Park.
Well, thank you very much. That's right. No, in fact, Madam Speaker, if that is the rule, I was thinking it was more relaxed in late debate, but if that's a rule, then I'll speak for 10 minutes. That'd be fine. Thank you very much. And of course, with this resolution in front of us, it was proposed by the Conservative Party. It's talking about the need, it's actually a little bit vague, but the need to, I guess, avert strikes. We all agree with that. And to prevent disruptions in the healthcare field. And with that, Madam Speaker, there's a number of points that I think are worth looking at. A number of years ago, we were considering the very same issue. It was a different time and maybe different strikes, but as Madam Speaker knows, I've been a member for 9 years, and we've certainly had the opportunity in that time to look at strikes and pending disruptions in healthcare and in other sectors. And we had the opportunity to speak to academics who've studied this across the country. One of the things that is interesting, Madam Speaker, is to note that jurisdictions that have got a complete ban on strikes and legislation in place that bans strikes in healthcare have actually seen a lot more strike days than we have here in Nova Scotia. And I think you have to look at evidence to see whether or not making a bill like that is actually going to create the outcome you want.
Thank you. The honourable member for Halifax Clayton Park.
Okay,
No, I think it's been on it's been on until that moment.
Well, thank you. Yes, I just thought I perhaps was not recognized for a moment, but that's good. As I say, putting in legislation that there's an outright, complete ban on strikes doesn't prevent strikes from occurring. And the jurisdiction I'd like to reference today is Alberta. Alberta's had this kind of legislation for, I think it's 29 years, if I'm not mistaken. And in that time, they have lost many more days than we have to strikes. And so I'd like to just give an idea. It's 29 years that they've had this legislation in place, and that, as I say, gives ample time to look at the impact and to see if it's effective. And in Alberta, what they've actually seen in that period of time was, for example, in 1988, nurses went on strike in Alberta with no emergency plans in place. And they just walked out, and they walked out for a total of 266,000 person days. That wasn't just an hour or two. I know in our time we saw a strike once at the IWK in that 9 years that I've been elected, but it lasted less than half a day. This was a strike in Alberta of nurses that went on collectively 266 1,000 work days lost, nursing days lost. That's very significant, Madam Speaker. And what we need to know is that if you ban strikes outright, you're not going to have an emergency plan in place because there is no mechanism that allows the union and the management to sit down and write out a plan about what will happen in the event that negotiations break down, in the event that the workers feel compelled to strike. In our healthcare system here, I know it's disruptive, but at the same time, the members sit down in good faith, the union representatives and the management, and they map out the areas that must be covered and the number of staff that are required in key areas. They ensure that emergency surgeries are still continuing, that the emergency rooms looked after, that cancer treatments would continue, certain key areas that we know would be just, have tremendously negative impacts on the health of Nova Scotians if they were abandoned for any period of time. And the nurses and others as well in our healthcare system have recognized that, and they will sit down and go through that laborious, detailed negotiation to come up with exactly the plan that will be in place if that emergency occurs and the workers are on strike. And so that we can have some measure of comfort to know that there's a plan in place. Now, contrast that with a jurisdiction like Alberta that has said just outright, very black and white, they say, there can be no strikes. But in fact, we know there can be. And when there is no backup plan, no plan in place that's going to ensure the health and safety of people in Alberta during that time. So it doesn't help to be so dogmatic. I mean, Alberta is, what did we hear recently? 40 years of a Conservative government. They're right-wing, they're dogmatic, they're rigid, and they've chosen for 29 years to ban strikes in the healthcare system. That hasn't helped anybody. Madam Speaker, I like to base my opinions on research, and I think that this is pretty compelling research. Just comparing what we have in Nova Scotia with what exists in Alberta, and to see that over that period of time we have had very few strikes in Nova Scotia. If I take the same 29 years that we've compared with Alberta's legislation, they had in that time, let me just see now, Nova Scotia, where we still have the right to strike, we had 12 strikes that occurred in that setting. Ironically, 9 of those strikes in the last 29 years occurred when the Tories were in power. So I think that kind of points to the Conservatives maybe not having the best ability to negotiate, or perhaps not being as able to finesse a solution as some other governments were. We remember, it actually predates, I think, all of us here in the legislature today, but certainly Bill 68 was a tremendously disruptive time for nurses in this province, and they certainly came out in droves at that time. I believe it was in the early 2000s to bitterly complain about the treatment at the hands of the Conservatives at that time. And the House here, I believe, was in 24 hours a day for a little while, that we were sitting around the clock with nurses in the gallery right throughout those discussions, because there are thousands of nurses in this province, and they definitely felt very strongly in the face of the treatment they were getting in Bill 68. But as I mentioned, it's a bit of a digression there, but if you compare the strikes that we've had in Nova Scotia, I say there's been 12 in healthcare, but that would include many very short strikes, and the IWK one, which is in more recent times, is an example where people were out picketing for one shift, and it was resolved. And in the face of that strike, still, as much as we were worried about all of the children and what was happening at the IWK, there were emergency plans in place for all of the people who were critically ill, who needed cancer treatment, who might be injured and arrive at the emergency room. They would not have found any further disruption than would be normal at those sites. And we know that one thing interesting about our healthcare system is it does kick in, and it really delivers when there's a serious crisis. When a family is in crisis, when they get a diagnosis that's very serious, I'm hearing time and time again how pleased they are with the response from the healthcare system. Where we seem to fail is when we have chronic disease or the need for surgeries that are not considered life-threatening. They might be terribly, debilitating. They could be the need for surgeries like knee and hip replacements, that type of thing. They tend to be delayed, and people are hampered. Their lives are hurt. They're in pain. but our system really does well when there's a crisis, and I think that our current legislation around strikes is fair, and it allows for a backup plan that protects Nova Scotians, and we need to keep that in mind as we look forward to the next round of negotiations, which I understand are looming very soon with 6,000 nurses who are represented by the Nurses Union rather than NSGEU. Madam Speaker, I had an email recently from one of the healthcare workers whose contract is soon to be renegotiated, and I can tell you one of the things they're very concerned about is certainly the fact that they've been asked to hold to 1%. Now they've seen other unions get a higher amount. Certainly that raises expectations, but they're mostly annoyed about the choices, the priorities that this government are making. And they're making them every day here, that we hear about these large amounts of money being funneled through the Industrial Expansion Fund. The nurses' email that I had received in particular spoke about the $300 million that's being given to Irving shipyards. Have we had 10 minutes yet, Madam Speaker? Very nearly. Well, those kind of decisions are a real thorn in the side, and certainly increase the animosity that might come in future negotiations. And I think the government needs to be aware of that as well as they go forward. But my feeling overall is that Nova Scotia has been well served by having a system which allows for a backup plan, and unions that I know are well-meaning and certainly care about the patients. Thank you very much. Thank you. How'd 10 minutes go by?
Thank you. The time allotted for late debate has elapsed, and thank you all members for participating this afternoon. The House now stands adjourned to meet again tomorrow at 2 p.m. Thank you.